Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Macca. I'm Director of Public Programs with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Delighted to see you all for what is an incredibly timely discussion. Is it not loud enough right now? Dan, can you give me a little more volume? Sound check. There we go. Now I can hear myself. Delighted to see you all for what is going to be an incredibly timely discussion tonight. A few brief housekeeping points. We are on the record. We're live streaming, so please do silence your phones, but please feel free to use social media. Send out your questions and your thoughts, and we'd love to engage with you digitally as well. For nearly a century, the Council on Global Affairs has provided an independent, nonpartisan platform for a variety of different perspectives to promote deeper global understanding and active U.S. engagement in the world. We convene leading global voices, conduct independent research, and engage the public in the discourse on critical global issues. Views expressed by individuals we host are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the Council. We are a membership organization, and it is your support that allows us to continue hosting important speakers like we're hosting tonight. Fittingly, today is Giving Tuesday, so please consider to give to our annual fund or joining our membership if you're not currently involved. Talk to myself or any of my colleagues, and Giving Tuesday ends at midnight, so find us before then. To introduce our guests in the program tonight, please join me in welcoming a longtime Chicago Council board member, the president of the Global Philanthropy Partnership, and the president of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation from 1989 to 1999, Adele Simmons.
Thank you. So, welcome and thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. On behalf of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, I'm excited to welcome Dan Balz, the Washington Post chief correspondent, back to our platform. Dan spoke here last in 2009, and the world is a quite different place now. The 2016 election has finally come to an end, with Donald Trump set to take control of the White House on January 20th, despite losing the popular vote. Now, from Wall Street to Main Street, the attention turns to Trump and his appointees and wondering what they will set as their priorities. Those of us who participated in the Council's recent visit to NATO and the EU met with world leaders and learned that their countrymen and they are all very much interested in what's going to happen, trying to understand the election, and intensely watching to see where the new president, along with the Republican Congress, will lead America in the international arena. How will the Trump administration act on immigration, trade deals, the Middle East, our international alliances, and more? We all look forward to hearing from Dan Balz tonight on how the election unfolded and what we can expect from the new administration. Dan grew up in Illinois. He's been a political reporter and editor at the Washington Post for nearly 4 decades. He is a recipient of numerous awards, including the White House Correspondents Association Merriman Smith Award for Deadline Writing, the Gerald R. Ford Award for coverage of the presidency, and the American Political Science Association's Carey McWilliams Award. He's the author of bestsellers on the 2008 and 2012 presidential elections. And most important, he is my daughter's father-in-law. Ivo Daalder, the Council's president, will interview Dan, and as always, we will have time for audience questions. So please join me in welcoming Dan and Ivo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adele, and Dan, thanks for joining us. Welcome home.
Thank you. Great to be here. You didn't
co-
realize it was an inside job here, did you?
I did.
You did. The audience didn't.
And I'm glad, and I love inside jobs like this. These are great. So I did say, welcome home. How's it out there? How is Washington different today than it was, say, 8 years ago, and you were there 8 years ago, or 16 years ago, and you were there 16 years ago, or 24 years ago? That is, a new president, having been elected, change in party, as we had in 2000, and we had in 2008, we had in 2016. Is Washington different today than it was in 2000? 2000, we weren't even there yet. Let's
Right.
do a month later from now.
Well, I mean,
in 2008.
If you think about 2008, I mean, it's dramatically different. The mood, I think, of the whole country after Barack Obama was elected was one of hopefulness. We were in a terribly difficult economic period, obviously, but there was something about his election that even people who didn't vote for him felt there was something good about what had happened, that we had broken the racial barrier of the presidency, and that he had kind of captured a spirit of perhaps we can put behind us a lot of the divisive politics that had built up in the 90s and in the Bush administration. Today, it couldn't be more different. I mean, we're in a city, obviously, that's in shock at the outcome of the election, as are many people. People in Washington did not anticipate that Donald Trump was going to be the new president-elect. But also there is just a great deal of uncertainty about what a Trump presidency will really mean. There is so much that we don't know about what he's going to do as president. There's things that he said and did during the election that have given a lot of people pause for good reason. And so right now, I think it's a very nervous city. The closest thing I would compare it to is 1980, when Ronald Reagan was elected. Now, this was a much bigger shock, both to the system and to a lot of people, that Donald Trump ended up winning this election than Reagan. I mean, you could see that Reagan was going to win that election in the final couple of weeks, but nonetheless, it was a moment in which a lot of people in Washington, which at that point was, even though the presidency had been divided between Republicans and Democrats, was very much a Democratic-controlled city in terms of the House and Senate. The Senate flipped along with Ronald Reagan, and there was this question about what did this mean? What was this country that had just elected Ronald Reagan as president and brought in a Republican Senate? And so we've got a version of that today, but with, I think, greater uncertainty, much deeper divisions within the country, and greater concerns about what the new president will want to do.
So I think we'll get to the first and the last point, but let's talk about the division for a moment that was highlighted by this election. In some ways, what was this election about? What's the message that this election sent?
I think there are several messages that it sent. I mean, we have known we're a divided country. That's not new. I mean, this country has been divided for quite a while. When Barack Obama spoke at the Democratic Convention in 2004 and talked about we're not red America or blue America, we're the United States of America, we knew even then we were divided, and it has become, those divisions have become deeper in the 8 years that Barack Obama has been president. So it's not that it was a divided country, but I think what this election was about was a recognition that a whole part of the country felt alienated, felt left behind economically, had grave reservations about kind of many of the cultural changes that have been taking place, and felt voiceless until Donald Trump came along and gave them a voice. And I think that the outcome of the election, as I say, was a shock to the system. It was in many ways both a kind of a cry for a recognition of people who have been suffering at the hands of all kinds of forces, globalization or the elites or Wall Street, however you want to define it, and who felt that the country that they believed in and the country that they had grown up with as a great and strong country was being eroded. And there was an element of national identity to this election. There were some very raw forces that got unleashed, whether it was issues of racism or xenophobia. That was all part of this election. But I think at heart, it was a combination of economics and national identity and this kind of cultural tension that's at the root of some of the changes that we're going through.
So I would agree. I mean, these are deep-seated and in some ways long existing divisions. So why did we get this so wrong? What was it? We're shocked. I think that's an expression that will go beyond Washington to even Chicago and in terms of the outcome. But if these divisions existed, if this was out there, why did we get it wrong?
Well,
did we get it wrong?
Well, you could argue that we, whoever we are, didn't get it that wrong. I mean, the popular vote did go for Hillary Clinton. The polling on the national numbers, in the end, will not be that far off and may not be any farther off than it was in 2012. It just happened to predict a different winner in the Electoral College than we thought. Also, 3 states that decided this election were decided by very thin margins. I mean, Wisconsin is less than a percentage point. Michigan is less than a percentage point. Pennsylvania is just a tad over a percentage point. A few thousand votes, well, more in Pennsylvania, obviously, but a relatively few thousand votes in those 3 states would have changed the outcome. And then people, how would we be reacting to this? We would say, well, it came out exactly as we predicted. And yet, in some ways, this maybe was the outcome that the country needed to recognize the depth of those divisions, and that you can't paper them over, that you can't ignore them, that you can't ignore a whole part of the country that has a different view of things than the people who have been governing the country.
And yet we got it wrong in some ways, and no one was willing to think through the possibility that Donald Trump could win. Certainly in the media landscape, in the mainstream.
Oh, I think that's right. I mean, I'm as guilty of that as anybody. I mean, I mentioned this to you earlier, but I was in Great Britain for the vote on the Brexit referendum, which was in many ways a carbon copy of what we saw happen here. Nobody predicted it. The elites were all on one side, and the people who don't trust the elites rose up and said, the heck with you, we're going in a different direction. I wrote a piece the next day that said the notion that it can't happen here is something that we ought to throw out of our lexicon for the rest of this election. But I wasn't at that time, and I wasn't toward the end of the campaign, predicting that Donald Trump would win. I mean, if you look at certain things about how people perceive Donald Trump, on election day, and according to the exit poll, 6 in 10 people who voted said they didn't think Donald Trump was qualified to be president of the United States, and yet he was elected president of the United States. So you look at a number of indicators that over time you have taken as moderately trustworthy, and they didn't work as well this time. And I think that to some extent we were blinded by kind of the empirical data that we were looking at. The state-by-state polling was more erratic than the national polling. We didn't take that into account enough. And I think the other thing that we underappreciated was that this was a change election. This was an environment in which people were ready for something different. And there was no way that Hillary Clinton could be a change candidate. She struggled with that in the primaries against Bernie Sanders, and she struggled with it even more against Donald Trump. I would also say that I think that the Clinton campaign, while they probably did a lot that was right, I think that there was one element that they never figured out, and that was, what was the real message for her beyond Donald Trump shouldn't be anywhere near the presidency? I mean, they set out to disqualify Donald Trump, and if the exit polls are right, they did a pretty good job of that. But they didn't have another message, which was, here is why I will be a good president for you. And I think that piece of it got lost in the Clinton campaign. And I think we underappreciated that. We also underappreciated, even though you could see it at any Trump rally, the enthusiasm for Donald Trump. I mean, it was profound and very strong. And you can try to factor that into the polling and take some measure of it, but it's a crude instrument to try to equate what seems to be what you see at a rally and what you see on election day.
You already started doing that with Clinton, but I'd love you to do it for both sides, from the Trump campaign and the Clinton campaign. Assess them as campaigns, as how they put together a winning strategy, where they went off the rails or where they turned out to be the right, we're able to get a hold of a message or something and really focus it on. And let's start with Trump.
Well, the only way to really think about Donald Trump is not to think conventionally. Because if you think about the Trump campaign conventionally, there are a series of events in a presidential campaign that are kind of the marquee events. And you're expected to perform well in those events if you hope to become president. One is the selection of a vice president, the process of the process by which you go about selecting somebody. Put aside the actual choice, but the process. His was very messy, hers was not. Hers was very smooth. The conventions, his was not as smooth as hers. Hers was very well scripted, probably one of the most well scripted conventions we've seen. The debates. She won the first debate by every measure. She won the second debate by every measure. The third debate, there was debate about who actually won that, but Donald Trump made his comment about, I'll keep you in suspense about whether I think the election was fair, and that blew up in his face. So she won the debate portion of it. She had more money. She had more television ads. She presumably, or so everybody thought, had a better ground game. So by all the conventional measures, Donald Trump's campaign, and plus he created controversies for himself, whether it was with Judge Curiel or the Cons or, then the Access Hollywood video. He created moments for himself that would have destroyed almost any other candidacy. So you put it in a conventional framework and you think there's no way he could have won. On the other hand, I described him a couple of weeks ago in a piece I wrote as, in some ways, our first independent president of the modern era. In this sense, we've known that the conditions have been out there for an independent candidacy, discussed with Washington, desire for change, a feeling that the system's rigged, a distrust of elites, all of these things, a belief that the two parties aren't working, that Washington doesn't work. All of that creates the conditions for somebody to come in from the outside and run. The problem with that is you can't win as an independent. So what Donald Trump had was, he had all of those conditions. He had celebrity. He had the money to run an independent campaign, and he had either the good luck or the sheer genius to say, I'll do a hostile takeover of an existing party because the only way you can win the presidency in this country because of the two-party system is to be the nominee of one of the parties. He understood modern media in a way that no other candidate did in this cycle. He understood the power of social media. He understood how to create distractions that were beneficial to him. He understood that things don't last very long, and so you can make a mess out of something, and within 2 weeks, the public has forgotten about it and has moved on to something else. And he was very opportunistic in the way he fought the final few weeks of the campaign. So in that sense, he ran, in retrospect, a very smart campaign, and he brought down, through the course of his entire candidacy, 2 dynasties. First, the Bush dynasty during the primaries, and then the Clinton dynasty during the general election. I mean, if you think about that, it is a remarkable accomplishment. Now, the Clinton campaign, in many ways, ran what you would say was the perfect campaign of a previous era, whether it was 2008 or 2012 or 2004. In other words, deeply researched, much polling, much focus grouping, much other work that they did to try to understand the electorate in order to produce the language that they needed to reach out to people, to get people to be on her behalf. A very big operation, a huge operation, a very deep ground game, huge staffs around the country, good advertising, a basic strategy, which was to disqualify Donald Trump and to force people constantly to think about Donald Trump, an effort to create on election day a choice between change on the one hand, which they knew was powerful and out there. They wanted to move that choice to risk. the risk of Donald Trump. They wanted voters in the end to decide the risk of Donald Trump would override the desire for change. You know, in many ways, it was a very well-run campaign. She was not the great candidate that her husband was, or that Barack Obama was. She readily admitted that. She has other strengths as a public servant, but being a natural campaigner was not one of them. They clearly made some mistakes. They put too much into the idea that you could disqualify Donald Trump. I think that they became, and this is something I'm still trying to get out of them as to what really went wrong, but they believed their analytics, their modeling. They were quite confident of that. They believed on election night that they were still going to win. I mean, you know, they thought that these states that ultimately went against them, Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, were going to be in their column by the end of the night, and it turned out they were wrong about that. I think that they recognized that there was a problem in trying to reassemble the Obama coalition, but I think they thought that they could offset that with this new division in the electorate, which is among the white population, those with college degrees and those without. I think they thought that those with the white college voter would gravitate to them more strongly than they did in the end. And I think they thought that the Republican Party would in the end stay more fractured than it turned out to be. So they ran, they didn't run a bad campaign, but I think they always underestimated Donald Trump, as did so many of us.
So you described, on the one hand, the winning candidate as a hostile takeover of the Republican Party and succeeding. Question, what does it tell us about the future of the Republican Party?
I did a piece just before the election that said, almost no matter what happens, the Republican Party is heading for a civil war. Right now, we're not seeing that, but I don't know that what we'll be looking at in a year or 2 years, what this is going to be. I mean, I think one of the questions right now about Donald Trump is, in some ways, the administration he's assembling looks to be one that will be very conventionally conservative Republican. I mean, in some ways, almost a kind of a Ted Cruz agenda for some of the issues. Certainly on the issue of the Affordable Care Act. I mean, Tom Price, as the new HHS secretary, is an ardent opponent of the Affordable Care Act, and it will lead the effort to try to dismantle it. Some of the other people who are in the administration are also going to push in a very conservative direction. But Donald Trump doesn't have consistently conservative views, as we know. His views on trade are not where the Republican Party is. His views on infrastructure are not necessarily where the Republican Party is. There may be a way to patch over some of those differences. His view on entitlements is not where Paul Ryan is, certainly. And so the question is, who will control the Trump presidency? Will it be, in a sense, the Republicans in Congress with a strong encouragement from the new vice president, Mike Pence, who is out of that part of the party? Or will Donald Trump shake things up and create, ruptures and mischief that will expose those divisions? I mean, I think that's the potential that the Republican Party has to deal with. Right now, people have decided he won the presidency. He's run as a Republican. Everybody will try to get on board, but it's a lot easier to do that in November and December and January, in the months after the election, and much more difficult after you see how that presidency plays out in a year or a year and a half.
I mean, the essential fissures that were there on November 7 are there on November 9. They've been paved over in some ways, but the notion that the Republican parties was not meeting the wishes of those who ultimately voted for Donald Trump, and by the way, ultimately also voted for a Republican Senate and a Republican Congress, House, and yet the party seems pretty united. You look at the other side, where everybody thought that a Hillary Clinton victory would lead to the greater solidification of the Democratic Party, and now that party is asking the question, where is that going? So where is the Democratic Party going?
Well, the Democratic Party's got a real problem, and it predates the result of this election. If you look at the Obama presidency, one of the pieces of his legacy is a Democratic Party that has been decimated across the country. They lost 60 plus seats in the House while he's been president. They've lost the Senate. The governorships are overwhelmingly in the hands of the Republicans, and the Republicans control outright a majority of the states, and have made huge gains in state legislatures during the 8 years that Barack Obama has been president. So we've constantly kind of focused on the presidential vote as an indicator of where the country is going. We did that in 2008 and we did that in 2012, and we talked about this kind of ascendant America, as Stan Greenberg put it in the book that he wrote about a year ago, about the rising new American electorate, an electorate that is more diverse, more tolerant on cultural and social issues, and one in which the Democrats had the route in, and yet we've seen something quite contrary to that in the way these midterm elections have played out, and now it's happened in the presidential election. I think that the problem that has happened, and this is not Hillary Clinton's fault, but the fact that Hillary Clinton was such a dominant figure heading into 2016 just simply suppressed a whole generation of younger Democrats. So the question is, where are the future leaders of the Democratic Party? And I think that's very much an open question at this point. And without leaders, one of the things we know about modern politics is, as we saw with Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, some kind of star power is essential. And you look out across the country at Democratic politicians, and it is hard to come up with many who have that star power. Now, we're a long way from 2020, but there will have to be a real battle for that. But it has to begin in 2018 in trying to recover some of the governorships that they lost, particularly in this region. Whether it's Wisconsin or Michigan or Ohio, here in Illinois. These are states that in order to regenerate a political party, you need to have strength in the states. And so it has to be a high priority of the Democrats to do that. The other thing we know about the Democratic Party is that it has moved to the left. Bernie Sanders kind of ratified that shift that was taking place in part because of Obama and in part despite Obama. Hillary Clinton was pushed to the left by Bernie Sanders, and I think that the result of her losing is that the party will push again even more to the left. The question is that a winning strategy in the long term? We'll see. It may be the only route that they know what to do or how to take right now, but I think it's an open question of whether that's the right way.
You mentioned the leaders of the future of the Democratic Party. Barack Obama, in his interview with David Remnick in The New Yorker, mentions three potential future leaders, one of whom was the vice presidential candidate Tim Kaine, which is the obvious choice. The second one was a not yet junior senator from California who just won, and the third person was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. If that is the total bench of the Republican Party, one wonders, according to the President of the United States, of the Democratic Party, you wonder. But it does raise a question. At the point you make of the Democratic Party moving left, the Republican Party, in some ways feeling that having won the strategy that everybody thought had been failing, in fact, has been vindicated, that we can just continue the kind of policy that Paul Ryan and others had been pursuing, that you now have two parties that in fact are not speaking to a larger middle that is sitting in the middle, potentially. And then the question always is there room for a third party? Where would that third party come? If the Democrats become the party of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and the Republicans, the infighting we saw prior to November 8th will continue sometime in July or what have you, there is that hunger for the middle. David Brooks has been writing column after column about it, of a fiscally conservative, socially liberal, an open America versus a closed America kind of party. Is there room for an independent party? Has the time come for some fundamental realignment, or is this just another blip in the story of the two-party system?
Well, again, I would say I would at this point not rule out anything, given what we've been through, and given
the new journalistic wisdom. Never say never.
Given the humility that we all now approach our work, but I think that a couple of things. I'm old enough to have covered John Glenn's candidacy for the presidency, and that barely made it into 1984. And John Glenn was even then talking about creating the sensible center. Nobody has been able to do that in this country, and I think that over time, and particularly in the last dozen years, the center has almost disappeared in this country. I mean, we have, through the homogenization of the parties, the sharpening of the debate, and particularly the kind of polarization that, in a sense, started up here, but has now filtered down to the body politic. There isn't that much of a center right now to recreate, and so that's one point. I think the second is that politics and political parties. I mean, it's an organic situation. There is nothing static about it. I thought before Donald Trump got into the presidential race that the battle for the Republican nomination would be a battle that has been brewing for some time, which is, if you want to put it in two people, Ted Cruz's vision of what the Republican Party needed in a nominee versus Marco Rubio's, which is to say, Ted Cruz's view, which is we need to go hard right, we need to have somebody who believes in those ideas and policies and principles, we need to have somebody who can articulate it and articulate it strongly, and galvanize people in that way, versus Rubio's, which was, this is a party that has to recognize we live in a changing America, and for the Republican Party to survive, we have to find a way to reach beyond our traditional base, particularly to the Hispanic community, to the Asian American community, and to some extent to the African American community, though that's a much harder thing to crack. Donald Trump kind of knocked all that off the table this time. So there's a question in my mind of to what extent that still has to come back for the Republicans, and how the Republican Party will evolve with Trump now as the leader of the party and the leader of the country. For the Democrats, I think we're in a period of kind of trial and error. I mean, what the Democratic Party may have to go through is what they went through after losing to Reagan and then to Bush in 1988, which is a kind of a rethink of what the party needs to be, but that takes some organizational strength. It takes somebody like a Bill Clinton to do that, and it takes an understanding of where the country is. I don't think the Democratic Party is quite at that point right now. I think that, as I say, I think that the party will move to the left for a while and see what happens. But I don't think either party is in an overly secure position in that way. Both of these parties are going to have to evolve, and the Trump presidency kind of throws everything up in the air because he's so unpredictable about what he's going to be like as a leader.
I'm going to open up in questions for 1 minute. There's one issue that I think we're starting to really grapple with in a way that we haven't grappled with, which is the role of the media, and particularly the role of new media, and how a venerable institution like yours, the Washington Post, is now competing in a media environment that is so fundamentally different than even what it was in 2012. And so how you, as a veteran reporter who've been dealing with the ability and trying to figure out what's happening in the world and then writing about it in as an objective a way as you can. How do we deal with this new environment in which the number of hits that fake news gets is significantly higher than real news, and we don't even know what the difference between real and fake news is anymore? And frankly, a presidential candidate, now president-elect, who uses social media in an extraordinarily effective way, but not necessarily to enlighten the public, let alone spread facts. As part of that, by retweeting or whatever happens. And this is just so completely different. And you, as a Washington Post reporter, part of that extraordinary newspaper and establishment, how do you deal with it? How does your paper look at this, and how do you address that fundamental question that really confronts, I think, all of us?
I think this will be the most challenging period for the media that I can remember. Presidents and the press never get along, and they're not supposed to get along. But everybody has played by at least a nominally an accepted set of rules of what those interactions are like. But we know, predating Trump, that the fracturing of the media had already taken place, that we no longer see the world in the same way, and that if you see the world in one way and you see the world in a different way, you can find all the information you need to reinforce your view of the world and to discredit the other person's view of the world. Donald Trump has taken that to a new level because of his willingness to traffic in falsehoods, in lies and untruths. And he does it routinely. And some would say maybe he does it shrewdly or cynically or however he does it. Some of it he may believe, some of it he may not. But the age of social media encourages that. And because of the kinds of websites that now exist that traffic in it, and it's not just Breitbart, I mean, it's various other ones that are, that traffic in this. It makes it harder for us to do the job the way we are used to doing it. But I don't think there is any, radically different solution to what we're supposed to do. I mean, we took on the challenge of covering Donald Trump from the very beginning. Not that people anticipated that he would be the Republican nominee, let alone the President of the United States, but that he was a candidate, he was a serious candidate, and we were going to cover him the way we covered every other serious candidate. And we started to dig in on Donald Trump early, as we had tried to do with Hillary Clinton as well, and with some of the other Republicans. And we did a lot of accountability reporting on his businesses and his overseas dealings and his background in New York. We tried in every way we could to understand the Trump constituency, to take them seriously. We called him out when he said things that weren't true. David Farenthold of our staff did an absolutely brilliant job of debunking the idea that the Trump Foundation was in fact a charitable foundation that he had been giving millions of dollars to, that had been then giving them to other charitable causes. And we will have to continue to do that. I mean, I think that the only way we can do what we do the way we believe to do it is to be as rigorous as we can about every aspect of his presidency, and hope that there is an audience out there that is listening. Now, the truth is there is a big audience. I mean, our traffic on our website is, huge at this point. And in many ways, we're a digital first operation. I mean, we've made the transition into digital journalism, but we recognize that we are in an amazingly competitive environment, and a competitive environment that we've never had to deal with before because of the difference between kind of traditional journalism and traditional journalism approaches and kind of the fake news world in which we're operating. So Donald Trump, by every indication, is not going to do traditional things with the media or the White House press corps. There's a lot of talk at this point about whether he will hold press conferences. He hasn't held one for 125 days. No new president in our lifetimes has gone this long after an election without a press conference. He hasn't done it. He doesn't seem concerned about that. We don't know whether the White House briefing room will remain the White House briefing room.
Maybe bring the swimming pool back.
They could
which
bring
is
the
where it
swimming
used to be.
pool back and move the press over into the old executive office building. We don't know how he's going to interact. We know he has said things about libel laws that he thinks they ought to be loosened. We don't know whether he will take that seriously. He said he was going to sue the New York Times after they did the story about his tax returns, and that when he showed up at the New York Times last week, he certainly didn't bring a summons or anything with him, and in fact talked about them as one of the great jewels of journalism in the world. So we don't know what he's going to be like, but I think every indication is that he's going to be anything but traditional or conventional, and not particularly respectful. I mean, he goes after news organizations when he feels that they've gone after him, and that's kind of his MO.
It's going to be an interesting 4 years. Let me open it up. If you please raise your arm, I will recognize you. And if you can wait for the mic till it gets to you. And once the mic gets to you, if you can state a question, that would be fantastic. We'll start all the way in the back. And we'll make our way forward.
Excuse me.
How significant do you think Hillary Clinton's ethical problems were during the campaign, the emails and the Clinton Foundation? Did the news media and everyone else discount that wrongly? Did it have a much more profound effect on the electorate than they try to make it out to be? And will he prosecute her?
I doubt he said that he won't, but Donald Trump has changed his mind on a lot of things, so I think we have to wait and see what happens. I think I'd be surprised if he did at this point, but that's up to the Justice Department, and to the extent that there's an investigation underway of the foundation, that will presumably continue. I don't think we underestimated the ethical problems, and in fact, I think some Hillary Clinton supporters and the Clinton campaign think we were quite unfair. The media writ large, in the focus on that, particularly the emails, that we made more of that than was justifiable. But we certainly know that there was a view of her in a considerable portion of the electorate. I don't want to quantify it in terms of percentages, but close to half, if not half. That thought she had serious ethical problems, that they were disturbed with the way she had handled the email issue, that she had not fully accounted for it or apologized for it. I think that the Clinton Foundation, which has done some very, very good things, nonetheless raised ethical questions, and I think that you can hold those two views and not feel that they're contradictory, and I think that a lot of people recognize that. I think that there was some element simply of Clinton fatigue. I mean, if I had gone to the bank with the first focus group I watched of this cycle, which was in January of 2015 in Denver, Colorado, moderated by Peter Hart, who's a longtime pollster and is one of the partners who does the NBC Wall Street Journal poll along with a Republican firm. Peter did a focus group for the Annenberg Public Policy Center at University of Pennsylvania. And the one takeaway from that was people didn't want a Bush, and people were reluctant to see a Clinton, and they didn't really want to see a Bush-Clinton election. They were tired of dynasties. They were certainly more tired of the Bushes than they were of the Clintons, but you could see in that group, and this was a mixed group, it wasn't all one side or the other, some very thoughtful people. That was there from the beginning, and that was part of what she had to deal with, and I think that in the end that was a factor. Now, the Clinton campaign has said that they believe that the letter that the FBI director, James Comey, sent to the Hill the 10 days before the election was an absolute killer, that was fundamentally what changed the outcome of the election in the end. They haven't presented all of the evidence. I have no doubt that it certainly had an effect. We could see the tightening in the polls in a variety of places in that period. And it may have been that was a kind of a trigger that said to people who had serious reservations about Donald Trump, it reminded them of the reservations they had about Hillary Clinton. And one thing we knew about this campaign was if you were in the spotlight in the news as the candidate, it was usually bad for you. I mean, there was almost no time if you were the target of most of the coverage that it was good. And unfortunately for Secretary Clinton, the last 10 days were a lot about her and the emails and all of that. And that may have been the gateway for some people, particularly some of the college-educated white voters who were not traditionally Republican voters, to make their way back to Donald Trump.
The lady right here on at the aisle. Thanks.
Do you have any concerns that so many negatives have come out about Donald Trump and kind of the way he operates, that if he really does something really questionable, the public will be hardened to it and won't care?
Well, sure. I mean, I think the evidence of the last 18 months, in a sense, proves that I mean, here's a guy who, on his opening day, insulted Mexicans. Within 2 weeks, had insulted John McCain. Within a few weeks after that, had insulted Megyn Kelly, who called for a ban based on religion of people entering the country, who got into an argument with a federal district judge who was of Mexican heritage, but was born and raised in the neighboring state of Indiana, who got into a fight with a Gold Star family, and who, within a month of the election, was accused by 8 or 9 or a dozen women of sexual impropriety, and yet he ended up as president. So what's the reason for that? I mean, are people forgiving? Yeah, people are forgiving. Were people so eager for a change of direction that they really wanted to vote for him despite that? I know in talking to Trump voters, and some of my colleagues talked to many more than I did, but in talking to Trump voters, if you would ask them, does it bother you, things he has said, almost to a person, they would say yes. They did not like the inflammatory way he talked about things. They were bothered by that. But they saw in him something else. And I think for many of them, they saw him as their voice in a country in which they had no voice. And to the extent that that continues, he will have quite a lot of leeway to do other things and probably survive them. Now, we don't know that, but I think that there is a bond between Donald Trump and his, a lot of his supporters that is very strong, and I think he has maneuvering room to do a lot of things, and that they will stay with him because they think that he understands them and their concerns. But we'll see how he actually handles himself as president. We know that you can say and do things as a candidate that you can't necessarily do as president of the United States. Maybe he will forever change the rules, but you have to think that at some point some of those rules still apply.
Mike Merwin, right, yeah, thanks.
With respect to this constituency lost behind, no voice, this odd marriage of them with the billionaire, was there any focus group insight strategy 18 months ago by the Trump campaign to identify them, or was it just dumb luck? They fell in bed together.
Well, I don't think there was much of an effort because it was a very small campaign operation in those early days. And Donald Trump, they didn't do any real polling in those early days, not much focus grouping. I mean, I think one thing about Donald Trump is he's a gut operator, right? I mean, he operates on instinct. But I also think he believes he can read situations and read people. And if you think about the way he read his opponents and in a sense, branded them indelibly in negative ways. I mean, starting with low energy Jeb and then little Marco and, Lion Ted and, and then finally crooked Hillary. In a sense you think, well, this is just kind of a throwaway, but there was something about that. And I think that he also, in that larger message, it was the combination of trade on the one hand and immigration on the other. One being, speaking to, the economically left behind part of the country, and the other speaking to the issue of kind of national identity and the values of the country and how the country is changing in ways that are disturbing to a lot of people who have those values. I mean, that ultimately proved to be a very powerful combination of messages. It reached different people. It also reached, those circles intersected. And you make the point that others have made, that it's ironic that it's this billionaire who seemed to tap into that constituency. And yet Donald Trump is, he's not a traditional billionaire, right? I mean, he's not a Wall Street billionaire. He's not somebody who's come up through the financial world. I mean, he's kind of been his own operator all through life. And he had the advantage, as I said earlier, of being a celebrity. People had watched him on The Apprentice for 10 years. They felt they knew him. They responded to him. And so he had all of that going for him. And so he tapped into something that was there, and then I think he amplified all of those kinds of feelings that were out there in a part of the country and turned it into a real movement.
So I guess I figured it out finally. I never watched The Apprentice, so I that may just to add to it, because when we were putting together our annual poll, the council poll on part of the argument we were trying to get to was, so who is this voter who is going to be the Trump voter? And there were three issues that we looked at in order to try to drive it home. One was trade, as you mentioned. The second was immigration. And the third was a hard-nosed approach to terrorism. And if you look back at his campaign, those were the three issues that he just hammered away over and over and over again. And when you look at it, it's about 30 to 40% of the American public that fits right next into that hole. And he was able to take that 40% and make it 46%, 47%, and it was just enough. And the question of whether it was deliberate strategy or not, there was something deliberate about it.
There was, and there was
because it succeeded.
The other aspect was, there was a simplicity to that message. I mean, that slogan, "Make America Great Again." I mean, if you think about that, it's powerful and it's direct and it's understandable. And if you try to think about what Hillary Clinton's similar message was, which stronger together was part of it, but that was kind of a mushy. It didn't. It conveyed some aspect, but it didn't have the power that his did, and it wasn't delivered, I don't think, with as much strength and power that he did.
Not enough hats stronger together. Lady on the side over there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I was thinking about the recent interview with Donald Trump in the New York Times, and I was able to get through it for the most part, but I was thinking that, the traditional media and other outlets are doing a good job of covering these things that don't make sense to a lot of people. But when you have someone who's saying, well, the law's on my side, there is no conflict of interest, who's going to stop these things? I mean, it's even said that the Trump International Hotel on January 20th, it's going to be illegal for Trump to be landlord and tenant for that and it's going to be a host of other conflict of interests. We don't know if the Russians were involved in the fake news. Who now, with the whole Republican landscape across the country, who's going to stop these things that can, are technically illegal? Who's going to stop that?
Well, it's a great question, and there's no particular answer now other than a continued effort on the part of people, whether it's in my business or in other parts of society, that continue to point these out and raise questions about it, and see where that takes it. But there's no simple mechanism to affect that. It's unlikely, at least for the foreseeable future, that a Republican Congress is going to do any serious oversight of a Republican president. Just as you would have the same thing with the Democratic Congress and a Democratic president. It's just not the way that parties operate. Your point about the Trump Hotel is right. I mean, there's a clause in the GSA lease that says no government official can be a party to this arrangement, and so they'll have to try to figure that out. The Trump operation has had a variety of things to say about this. He has said, as Nixon said, years ago, if the president does it, it's the law, or it's not against the law. And that's kind of what Trump has said. The president can't have conflicts of interest. Others may disagree, and the Trump campaign has also said that their lawyers are going to be doing everything they can to make sure he's within the law. His new White House counsel is a very solid lawyer, Don McGahn. I don't know him personally, but he has a reputation that was vouched for by Bob Bauer, who was the counsel to President Obama, as being a serious practitioner who will presumably try to keep the president on the straight and narrow. But ultimately it will, as with all of these things, ultimately it's the public. To the degree to which he has public confidence, he can do a lot. Jim Rowe, the advisor to Harry Truman, wrote a famous memo to him back before the '48 campaign, and one of the things he said was that a president can lead only so far as he has public opinion on his side, and we know that Donald Trump starts with a very divided public. The Republicans are unified around him on Capitol Hill, certainly, and to some extent in the country. But we don't know if that will last, and we don't know what tolerance there will be for some of these things. We know that the public sometimes views these things differently than some lawyers or some journalists might view them, and so they apply a different standard. But he will, through his acts, either maintain public support or lose public support. And the degree to which he loses it, then he puts himself in jeopardy.
Right here up front.
I live in Wisconsin.
And wait for the mic, please. Otherwise, you're not going to be on the live stream.
I live in Wisconsin, and I wonder if you'd look ahead. We've gotten a little bit of notoriety lately, and wondering how
You've had notoriety for quite a while, actually.
Well, that's true. Joe McCarthy and La Follette and things like that. But what would be what do you see as the effects of this recount for the political parties, for the future of politics in general, if that were to somehow interfere with the functioning of the Electoral College?
Well, my assumption is that the recount in these three states that Jill Stein has petitioned for will not, I mean, everybody has said they're not going to change the outcome. Though the elections were close, it would be unprecedented for somebody to overturn an 11,000 vote margin, which is what you have in Michigan, and it's double or more than double that in Wisconsin, and well more than that in Pennsylvania. I think the issue that concerns me is the degree to which all of this, including some of the things that Donald Trump, one of the things he tweeted yesterday, which was, well, I would have won the popular vote had it not been for millions of people who voted illegally, that the result of all of this is corrosive on trust in the democratic process. And this election, the entirety of this election has been very hard on that process. And if we now go through, a period in which that confidence is further undermined by however it turns out, that is a poisonous environment in which to start a new presidency. or to carry on the arguments that are, that are in a sense the real arguments that we need to have as a country about where we're going. So it won't change the outcome, but it will create an environment in which people on almost every side will be able to just find some fault with the way the system had worked. I mean, there are a lot of people who think that because Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, there's something, terrible about the Electoral College, and that we ought to get rid of the Electoral College. And people who are on Trump's side who think that, as I got calls long before Donald Trump tweeted, calls and emails from people saying, yeah, well, why she won the popular vote, because undocumented immigrants were voting. This is out there. And so the more we kind of fly spec this system, I mean, we all know that the voting process depends on a variety of things. One is competent local officials, competent volunteers throughout the country who run the polling places and observe the polling places, and a general belief in the system that it's pretty sound. And the more that this election creates doubts about all aspects of that, the more worrisome it is.
Terry Diamond, right in front.
To the extent that 60% of people had a negative view of Donald Trump, I believe you said, and that although many people were turned off by some of the things he said, they still voted for him because they found that their voice and his voice, they were supporting his voice and what appealed to them. Does that imply that perhaps there's an element of people that voted for Donald Trump not because they were supportive of Donald Trump, but they wanted to just disrupt the system? And to the extent that may be so, would that make him perhaps more vulnerable in maintaining public support going forward?
I mean, yes and yes. I think that's right. I think that there's no question that there were any number of people who voted for Donald Trump simply because they're fed up with the system. It's the same as we saw in Britain with the Brexit vote. Despite all the warnings of the dire consequences of pulling out of the EU, people basically said, we don't believe that. We're prepared to take the chance, and we're going to go in the other direction. The dissatisfaction with the way the political system works is not confined to one side of the ideological spectrum or another. I mean, there are people on both sides of the spectrum who feel that in one way or another the system is either rigged, doesn't work, is in the hands of the elites or the big donors, and that perhaps the only way to get something working properly is to blow up the current system. And so I do think that was an element of it. It creates pressure on Donald Trump, but as I was saying, I think for the foreseeable future, there is a bond there between Trump and the Trump voters that allows him to get his feet on the ground and begin to make changes. I was talking about some of these very issues yesterday with my friend Ron Brownstein of the Atlantic Media, who's one of the smartest people on politics in the country. And one of the issues that we were batting around is it's not going to be easy for Donald Trump to deliver on the economic promise. I mean, if it were easy to do that, there would have been more progress on this front. He may be able to do some things, but delivering quickly on real economic gains for a lot of people who have been struggling is an enormous challenge and one that's going to take time, and we don't know exactly what his policies are going to be. So the question is then, does he stir the pot and keep his constituency bound to him by stirring on the cultural and social issues, and particularly the cultural issues? And I think that very well may be part of it. I mean, you saw what he did today on flag burning, which, as various constitutional experts have pointed out, was he basically challenged two parts of the Constitution, the 14th Amendment and the First Amendment. But it's also a position that is pretty popular in this country, that flag burning should carry a penalty. Most people wouldn't say you should lose your citizenship over it, but that there should be some penalty. Trump, it's not by accident that Donald Trump goes for those kinds of things. I mean, it is a way to remind people that I'm with you out there, I'm not with them. And so it's a difficult balancing act, but one that he pretty skillfully pulled off during the election, and we'll see whether he does it during his presidency.
I think it was Antonin Scalia who wrote the Supreme Court decision about the right to burn flags.
Yes.
The lady over in the nice in the black sweater, right here. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to the topic of media coverage of the campaign, given what you do in your background. And I was curious what your opinion is on what's been voiced from Clinton supporters with respect to the media giving Donald Trump the spotlight, and then also perhaps not highlighting some of the things that some of those people feel should have been highlighted throughout the course of his campaign, like, for example, the conflict of interest that was brought up.
Well, without trying to sound defensive about it, I think that those things were pointed out. I mean, there's no question that Donald Trump got a lot of free media. I mean, there was one estimate during the primaries that the coverage that cable gave him, and particularly his rallies, but also him calling into cable shows and things like that, was the equivalent of $2 billion in free advertising. And so there are people who, particularly Clinton supporters, who kind of seized on that as saying the media just gave themselves over to Donald Trump in an uncritical way. I disagree with that in this way. There isn't one of those, I mean, I went through a number of those controversies that started, almost from the day he announced. There wasn't one of those that did not get extensive media coverage. They all got a lot of coverage. And similarly, his conflicts of interest, his business dealings, things he had done. I mean, the suits against him for discrimination when he was building apartments in New York, the failures of what he did in Atlantic City, the degree to which he stiffed small vendors, all of these things. I mean, I can point you to a splash page at the Washington Post, or I could point you to the New York Times or others that extensively covered these. But as I say, for a lot of people, that kind of just washed over them. It's not that they weren't somewhat aware of that, but for a variety of reasons, they chose to focus on other things in their vote. So. Was the media perfect? No. But if you ask the Trump campaign, they would say that certainly from late June on, the media collectively was quite hostile to his candidacy. That the overwhelming percentage of the coverage was negative rather than positive. And there was a study done by the Shorenstein Center at the Kennedy School at Harvard that basically said the media through a lot of that period of the primaries was too positive. And our editor, Marty Barron, was on a panel recently, and he said, well, let's look at the way these stories were rated. One of the stories that the Washington Post did was a story, an effort to understand the Trump voter. To go out and talk to people who supported Donald Trump and to ask them why. It was a well-reported, thorough piece and quite balanced. That was rated as a positive piece because it wasn't negative. There was another piece that was rated positive that simply was the news story the night he won the South Carolina primary that said Donald Trump commandingly won the South Carolina primary and is now in the driver's seat to become the nominee. As Marty said, that isn't positive or negative coverage, that's just coverage. And so some of the ways in which the press has been criticized, I think, are unfair. Now, as I say, we're not perfect. We overlooked some things. We probably didn't do as much as we did, but I mean, the Post did an entire book on Donald Trump called Trump Revealed, which was as deep a dive as we've ever done on a presidential candidate, and it was bark off. It was not a positive book. It was a thorough examination of the rise of Donald Trump for many, many years. But people vote on a variety of different issues, and you can put all the information out there that you can, but people make their own decisions as to what they think are the important issues to them.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, this is all the time we have. I would point out that elections are a choice between two candidates, and part of the reason for voting for one may be because you don't like the other one. Perhaps in this election, that was a larger number of people than in any other election I have participated in, and I haven't participated in all that many, but certainly many that you have reported on. Dan Balz, you once again showed that you are a true king of political analysis and have highlighted what an important election it was and how important it was to cover it in the way you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.